Welcome to the What's Next podcast. Tonight we're sitting here with Jeff Duncan. You never know where I'm going to go with this. The goal is to get insights to your thoughts that not only with all the things you've done, but specifically I want to start with I was there when I picked up the Times-Picayune and saw the article that Steve Gleason was diagnosed with ALS. Front page. You broke that story. Tell me about that moment, because that was a moment as a Saints fan. I remember that. But you had that story and you broke it. So tell me on this journey you've been on with Steve Gleason.
Well, that was a long time in the making, actually. That was September 25th, 2011, when we kind of told the public. But I knew Steve had been diagnosed all the way back in December. So we were kind of sworn to seek. It was a little conflicting as a journalist because I was friends with Steve and Michelle. And, you get into a little bit of a gray area when you're doing that, right? So he's easily the closest player I've ever covered in terms of like crossing over the line. But mainly that happened after he retired. And I ran into them on Magazine Street in December. And Michelle has this frantic look on her face, and she says, "You've got to go in. Have you talked to Steve lately? You've got to go inside and talk to him." And she goes, "Just go talk to him." I went in, and we went over in the corner, and he told me
Oh my God.
he had not been officially diagnosed, but he was like 99% sure that this is what he had. And I didn't know what ALS was. So, but I knew it was serious. I could tell from his tone of his voice and how kind of, if you know Steve, I mean, he doesn't get really excited about anything. And he was almost scared for the first time I've ever seen him like that. So I went home and immediately started researching. And that was late December. And then he sent out an email to his inner circle January 5th when he had been diagnosed out in San Francisco. And it was this incredible email. We actually have it in the book, the email he sent. And it's so powerful. And in that email, he was saying basically, we want to keep this on the down low for right now, but it's a very serious thing. And so we started kind of planning out when he wanted to go public. And that took months because he was in the process of trying to see if he could be healed. If you know Steve, he's kind of a optimistic, hopeless dreamer, if you
No,
will.
who is Steve? Who is he? We don't know him. Who is this?
Oh my God. I mean, I could go on forever. I mean, I tell people all the time, Steve's the most I say Drew Brees is the greatest player I've ever covered, most talented leader, but Steve's the most interesting person I've ever covered by far. I mean, you could write a book about Steve Gleason without the block punt, without ALS, the journey he's on. I mean, he's that interesting. He was a guy that would show up every training camp. We were there on the arrival of training camp, and Steve would come walking in. They're all bringing their boxes in because they're getting ready to be there for a month. And Steve would have, pajama bottoms on and a Captain America T-shirt and flip flops and his hair in a ponytail. I mean, he was just an interesting cat. And he'd have traveled. Brett Martell, the Associated Press writer, myself, very similar sensibilities. Like we like sports, but like I cover sports because I'm interested in it, but I'm more of a journalist that covers sports as opposed to like just a sports guy. So I like finding people that are a little more well-rounded than just say what Steve calls them meat necks. He goes, "I don't want to be a meat neck." And Steve was not a meat neck. I mean, he traveled the world. And so every training camp, we'd sit down with him. "Okay, where you been?" Me and my brother were surfing in Chile, or we went to the Galapagos. A very big adventure traveler, and he'd regale us with these stories. He didn't really want to talk about football. And I'm drawn to people like that. And Scott Fujita was like that. If you're familiar with Scott Fujita, very, very worldly guy too. So Steve was just, he didn't really, he played football because he could make a good amount of money, but he didn't really love it. I mean, I think he enjoyed it. He liked the team stuff, but he used it as a means to an end. And so we connected in that way. And he was very smart. I tell this story a lot. The locker room is kind of this boys club, you go in there lots of times and it's just like a frat house, right? There's guys with towels, slapping each other and it's just mayhem. And you'd be in there, rap music playing, and I'd look over and Steve would be sitting kind of like in front of his locker, sitting on the floor with like a novel, just reading.
The same. I just told a similar story.
Similar?
Years ago, I got access to Saints training camp, and that was one of the things in the cafeteria that I noticed that everybody was just cutting up, having a good time, and I noticed him just over in a corner with his feet up on a chair reading. I don't know what he was reading.
Yeah.
Some sort of book, but.
I walked up to him. I go, "What are you reading?" He goes, "It's my favorite movie. It's The River Why by David James Duncan." And he gave me the book. I've still got it. I'm like, this is not a normal football player. I mean, it's just, you don't run into that a lot. So, he's just an interesting guy. He would talk to you about like Eastern philosophy and was really into yoga. And, he's deep. Matter of fact, one of the challenges we had in the book was dialing him back. And Michelle and I, his wife, were like, look, not everybody's going to get this. You want to do a separate book on your Eastern philosophy. That'll be cool. But we want to sell books. And this one,
I know what you mean.
let's get the bestseller out of the way.
But where did he come? Where did he come from? What's his motivation?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know where that comes from. I mean, he's from obviously, literally from Spokane, Washington, so he could not be from a further place, almost geographically. He's wired differently. I mean, his mother was an educator. His father was a salesman. I mean, but it got a lot of his deep thinking, I think, from his mother. And he's always been, an individual. He's not into groupthink, which I'm a big believer in. So we connect on that. He thinks outside the box always, which you can appreciate. He trusts his crazy ideas.
Yeah.
Like he's that guy. I mean, throughout the book process, like, should we go down this road? And he's like, no, that's too cliche. He does not want to do any of that stuff. Sometimes I think too far, but I like the mentality. And he has a running theme in the book that Michelle talks about where, Michelle's this, local girl, like most normal people, she thinks conventionally like we all do. And she said, like, when they went on this trip together, I mean, one of the things they did, instead of going on honeymoon, they went for 6 months all over the world on this trip. They brought basically one backpack each, and they stayed in hostels. This guy's making $800,000 a year, which is not, he's not a mega rich millionaire like Drew Brees, but he's making enough money to rent a car or something. But he didn't, they didn't want to do it. They rented some like exterminating vehicle or something like that. They drove it around and they slept in it. He just, it's part of the adventure to him, pushing himself. He tells these stories of going to meet his brother in Costa Rica for surfing trips. And one of the things he would do is he's like, don't tell me where you're at. So he would land in this little surf village and then just go to find his brother. I'm like, what the hell are you doing, dude? I mean, like, it shouldn't be that hard. You just try to find him in the town. That's how he's wired. We also have this in the book. One of my favorite stories about him. He went by himself to New Zealand for 6 weeks and went on a surfing trip. So all he took was his one backpack and a surfboard. Gets over there again. This is when he's been in the NFL for 3 years, so he's close to making $1 million a year at that time. So he's got money to rent a car, but he doesn't rent a car. Instead, he gets off the plane and just starts going around the Auckland airport to restaurants and bars and asks people in the bar if anybody's selling a car. I mean, who does that? I don't do that, especially if I'm making close to $1 million a year. I'm going to rent a car. But that's not how he's wired. And he gets in like the 5th place, and some bartender's like, yeah, actually, I got like a kind of a old beat up station wagon I'm trying to get rid of, And so he goes over to this woman's house the next day, buys the car because it's got racks on the top they can put his surfboard on, and he drives it for 6 weeks all over New Zealand on these surf trips, and then resells it before he flies back. And he's just a different human being. He's got the money, but it's not about that. It's not the money. He's thrifty and he thinks outside the box. He's like, why would rent a car and spend all that money when I can just buy it and resell it back and not spend any money? But it's so much harder to do that, is what I try and tell him. He's not afraid of that.
So there's so many angles here, but
Trust me, that's
yeah.
part of the problem.
So he blocks this punt. I mean, here we are, Katrina, and there's this. Happens to be the first game back after Katrina. It happens to be against the Falcons. He happens to block a punt. What was that moment for him? Like that. Was this meant to be? It feels like there's a meant to be story happening here. But what was that for him, or was that just I just did it?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think in some ways, if you believe in fate, which I kind of do, like I believe in something, I don't know, karma maybe. I believe in that. I mean, I believe like good things happen to good people, and I certainly think Steve's a good person, and I think he was the perfect person to have that happen to him.
Like the perfect.
Yeah, because he married a New Orleans girl. He got New Orleans. That's the other thing that I say. A lot of people come here. My brother-in-law is a good example. My sister loves the city. Brother-in-law, gated community guy, golf course guy, hates it. And he just doesn't get it. And you either get it or you don't. Steve immediately got it. Like he lived uptown, 1-bedroom apartment when he was playing for the Saints. I mean, that's another weird thing. Like, what are you doing? Got a bike. Didn't want to spend money on a bike helmet, so he goes.
A little helmet, right?
Yeah, he goes to the equipment manager and gets him to give him an old helmet. And he takes the face mask off, and that's what he uses as his helmet. He's driving around with old Saints helmet on. He's just an interesting cat. But he was living uptown, and meets Michelle, and decides this is the girl he's in love with and he wants to marry, and so he understood New Orleans very quickly. He learned the culture, its idiosyncrasies, its flaws. I think he's got a phrase in there about it's beautiful. It's beautiful flawed, it's a flawed city, but it's beautiful in that way. So he got it. And so when he blocked that punt, he knew immediately what he'd done. Like he knew it was going to be iconic. He knew right away. Like,
Did he know about how big it was?
yes, he knew right away. I mean, and that's why it was perfect for him. I remember going to the locker room, interviewing him afterward that night. And like he put it right in perspective. Like most people would be like, like it would be cliches. Now he knew right away he'd done something historic, and so that's why.
What did he say? I mean, what was that?
He said like, the city of New Orleans, was looking to us to do something great tonight, and like we did it, like and he didn't say he was talking about we, but he knew his role, and he was big in like that kind of thing, understanding the importance of sports sometimes beyond just the X's and O's and what happens on the field. He understood the significance of that game. I mean, that game was incredible. I tell people all the time. I mean, we had freaking U2 and Green Day playing the pregame like concert. I mean, what the hell's that? U2. They're like maybe the biggest band of all in the world.
Yeah.
They were playing pregame. Goo Goo Dolls were out on the apron. They're pretty big. They're out there on the apron. We had presidents there. Bushes were there. It was like
the world was watching.
It was a Super Bowl for a regular season game. There'll never be a regular season game, I think, that big in the history of the NFL. They put a Monday Night Football game with a Super Bowl musical lineup.
But did he think that? I mean, what it meant to our city? I mean, did that cement his connection to our city, or was it cemented before?
I think before. I mean, like he's cool with it being like noted for one play, but I mean, he was so much more than that. He was kind of a cult hero before that,
Huh.
So that was the other thing that was cool, was it happened to him, but he had this cult following. I mean, I used to say all the time, like who are these people wearing Gleason jerseys in the games? He's like a special teams demon. And I remember Sean Payton tells a story about when he first got the job, because Steve played for Jim Haslett before, so there's a transition. And Payton came in looking to get rid of people because he thought it was a culture of losing in the building. So, but he also said, like, there's going to be some people here that can help us win, that are winners and want change. And he goes, we got to identify. So it's kind of hard to identify, not just in the football operations, but also in the business operations. Really good leadership principles of like, there's not all bad people here. There's some assets. But he tells the story of walking in and seeing Steve back in the walking out of the weight room. Steve had his long hair and everything. He's not that big a guy, he's not intimidating. I think that's why a lot of people related to him. He's kind of everyman, like I can play in the NFL too. That guy played. And Sean said he looked like a Shetland pony walking out with his long hair. And he goes, people told me how great he was. He goes, but I didn't want a mascot. I didn't want this little clown, like he had to be able to play. And he goes, we figured out very quickly he could play and like we couldn't cut him. And he became like team captain that year. So, I mean, Steve, so all these principles that I learned during the book process of writing with him, all the traits that I think he applied to become an 8-year NFL player, and he was never even drafted. Like all those traits of attention to detail, discipline, drive, all those things he applied to this book. Like I saw it. Like I was like, this is why this dude's successful. It's why he built Team Gleason with a bunch of friends into the biggest ALS organization in the world, and why everything he touches is successful. It's the same traits. So he'd be successful no matter what he did, I think.
What have you learned from him? Like you've been on a 13, 14-year journey with him, and before that, but probably an intimate journey because you broke that story. What have you personally learned from him?
Well, I have to think outside the box a lot. Like I've kind of was that way anyway, but he takes it to the limit. I mean, one thing he does throughout his life, it's a common thread that I think we can all learn from is, push the envelope. I think the line he uses that Michelle tells all the time, like when they went on that trip, I was going actually in that direction. I got derailed, which happens a lot. I'm scatterbrained. When they went on that 6-month odyssey where they're traveling all over the world, um, Michelle and Steve, they're two different people in a lot of ways. And Steve always was pushing the envelope. So like when they would go on, and you'll probably all been on these things, like you go to a national park, right? You're on the trail that goes out to the waterfall, and there's like rails along, that you're supposed to stay on. Steve would like go venture off. And she'd be like, "What are you doing?" She's conservative. She didn't want to go over there. She's a rule follower. He's a rule breaker. And so they called it crossing the rope. The rope along the side of the thing. But he would pull her along against her wishes and get her over there and say, "Look at this view we got now because I did what we did." And she's like, "Why do you always have to cross the rope? Everything you do, you got to cross the rope." And he goes, "Because that's when life gets exciting." And so I've learned that, like,
Repeat that. Repeat that again. That's the line.
yeah, no, we almost called that the title of the book, like Crossing the Rope or something like that, because that's what he
When you
does.
cross the rope, that's where.
Go to the other side of fear. That's him. His big thing, and I said that the other night at the art exhibit, like he doesn't like to use the word fearlessness, or Steve's fearless. He hates that. He's like there's no such thing as fearless. I was scared every time I went on the football field, but I embraced it, learned how to, immerse myself in it, and then go to the other side. He said that's where life gets exciting, on the other side of fear. So go to it. Don't run away from it. Run to it. And that's what he did at football. And that's what he does in life in every way. That's what he's doing right now. I mean, I was over at his house Friday, so the morning after the event. And I'm with his caretakers, and he's got this new thing he's doing now. It's insane. So I went and did a story, the 10-year anniversary of his diagnosis. And at that time, I was watching his morning workout. The first chapter in the book is about the morning, what he calls his workouts, what his caretakers put him through to get him ready for the day. It's insane. Like, when I tell you it's like 45 minutes of intense work of stretching him, getting him ready. They force a bowel movement. They take him into the shower. They brush his teeth. I mean, after a while, you'd be like, man, I'm checking out. I can't do it. Like this is what he goes through every freaking day. It never goes away. He has to do it every day. And they've got it down to 45 minutes. It used to take an hour and a half. But I was over there, and when I did the 10-year anniversary story, to take the shower, they have to take his trach out. They have to take his ventilator off. So he has to not be able to breathe for a little while, and they know, how long he can do it. Well, at that time, he could go 45 seconds, pretty much, maybe a minute without breathing, and then they'd put the air back on. Well, the other day when I was over on Friday, they said he'll now go out underneath the oak tree in his backyard with this caretaker, Jenny, and they take the trach off, and he just sees how long he can go, and he's up to 3.5 minutes. And she said his lips start turning white, and she's looking at they're actually testing his pulse and his oxygen supply in his blood. It's down to 80%. And his pulmonologist said, if he gets down below 80, that's when he'll die. And they push it. And
He's going.
she's nervous, and we were giving her grief. They're like, how are you going to explain that, when he dies at your watch? Because y'all are pushing the envelope of that. And
He's pulling the rope.
He's pushing the rope. He's going on the other side. And I'm sitting there with him. I'm like, you're freaking crazy, dude. And he's just smiling, That's Steve, man. He's wired like nobody I've ever been around. And this is how he's pushing himself now, even though he can't move anymore. He's finding different ways to explore. And, that's amazing. And that's why people it's not just me, it's not just us that are drawn to him. I mean, Barack Obama asked for an audience with him. Bill Gates, we've got a blurb from the book for Bill Gates. Jeff Bezos. I mean, some of our most profound thinkers in the world are amazed by this guy. That's why I think we have to get his story out more, just like you're talking about. Not enough people know. That's why we're hoping the book hits the broader audience, because I think when people learn more about him, they're going to see this guy's amazing. I mean, Drew Brees, tomorrow Drew's going to be out at the golf tournament. Steve's coming out, and I mean, Drew's as big a fan as people are of Drew.
I texted Drew the photos, so he knows the photos.
Did you? Okay.
But that you've interviewed. You've written books with Drew Brees, Sean Payton, Steve Gleason. How do you rate them as leaders? I mean, they're three different leaders.
Yep.
And
different. But all
tell me
generational leaders.
Show me, is there a linkage between those? If you were to,
No,
for those of us real, basic human beings, what's the cross link between those three?
I think, this can be boring maybe to you, but no shortcuts. There's no secret sauce. They all work their butts off. I mean, I think thinking outside the box is big for all of them. I mean, Sean, I think they're lacking that out on Airline Drive right now. They're lacking that person that thinks with a vision, like a visionary. I don't think they have that. When Sean and Drew left, I think they lost that, and I think it's showing in the results. Sean is an unbelievable leader. One of the things that I learned from him was, don't make excuses. And I know that sounds simple, but I tend to think we do that a lot here in Louisiana. We play the victim card a lot. It's easy to do, right? We're 49th ranked in the state.
It's the potholes. It's the crime. It's
woe is me. He never would let that seep into his team. He would never let injuries and excuses. I think right now, to be honest with you, I think the Pelicans are falling into that trap of starting to blame the officials for everything. Bad call. Everybody gets bad calls. Payton would never do that. He's like, that's an excuse. That's a crutch. We're not going to leave.
LA. Come on.
I know.
That's a bad call.
I know, but you get bad calls.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. The Nola no call, that cost him. He definitely complained about that. But he's big on don't play the victim card. That's too easy to do. It's a loser's lament. And I've learned that about him. And I think we fall into that trap a lot. And I try to write that a lot in my columns, because I think it's something that we need to think about a lot as a society. We can't use those excuses all the time. He didn't, and that's why they were so highly successful out there. And I think both those guys, players, were attracted to that. But no, they liked hard coaching. They liked honesty. I mean, Payton. Leadership's hard, man. I thought Mitch Landry was a great leader here. I thought he was the best mayor we've had since I've lived here. He had to do a lot of hard things there was things that he got a lot of criticism for. You can't worry about that. And Payton is doing that right now in Denver. He just, traded Russell Wilson, who they spent $30-40 million a year on, trade him away, because he thinks they need somebody else there. Hard decisions, but you can't be afraid of criticism or outside noise. And but Drew's not like that. Drew's different in that way. I mean, Drew is like his greatest skill set. Zach Streep talked about. Zach Streep was the offensive lineman for the Saints, and he said something to me once. He said, like, Drew is this creature of habit and routine oriented. He said, like, what I'd like you to do to understand Drew Brees, he goes, go home today and write down your routine, everything you do, like when you brush your teeth, and then when you make your coffee that morning. Write it all down. He said, and then try to do it the next day, the exact same times, every day. He goes, imagine doing that for 17 years. He goes, that's what Drew Brees did. He goes, he never veered off his schedule. Every day. He goes, it's one thing to do it one day, 2 days. He goes, it's inhuman to continue to do it like Drew did every day. So his genius was in his discipline to maintain a routine and to never veer off of it. And people I've heard in the building tell me, like, sometimes Drew would be so wired in to getting to his next line item on his task list that people walk, if you've been in the Saints building, it's just like any other building, there's like a long corridors. Sometimes you're walking toward, and there's Drew Brees coming at me, right? So you're going to say, hey, Drew. And he would just kind of walk by, and people think, oh, he's not very nice. Well, it's not that. He's already thinking about his next task. He's so laser focused on a Tuesday to get to his next task. He didn't even want to stop and be chat because he needed to get to his 9:05 stretch or whatever it was. And so I wrote a lot about in the Payton Brees book about his routine and how disciplined he was, and like it's an insane level. Like all these guys at that level have to have some level of discipline, but Brees took it to another degree. And Payton used to talk about it. Even Payton was a little more, carefree. He's not wired that way. Payton, he was like that mad genius that's not organized, but when you get him locked in, is brilliant. That's Sean Payton. He's way more like party animal, and Drew isn't like that. So they kind of were yin and yang.
So, as you're talking, you think about being in the city of New Orleans post Katrina with these three individuals.
I know.
Like
And we were
the fortunate, whether you think of fate or whatever you want to think about, the factors in our city.
I think there was a dearth of leadership. I mean, I was here during Katrina. I mean, I don't know if y'all were all here during Katrina, but like, I think there's a reason that like Russell Honore, when he came in, if you remember, everybody gravitated to him because he was this kind of badass ass kicker. He came in. Remember, he had the "Don't get stuck on stupid," that line. I mean, we were looking for somebody to lead us. And I think that's why I did a big feature story on General Honore, and he was what we needed at that time, kind of a cowboy to come in here. And I think that's what Payton was. For years, Saints fans, the team had lost for decades. We were the scrawny kid on the beach getting sand kicked in our face, and then finally had this cocky guy that wasn't going to take it anymore. And I think Saints fans love that. Like, hell yeah, we got a cocky guy doing a choke sign to the Falcons during a game. What head coach does that? He's doing the skull clap.
A little too early with that one.
Yeah, a little too early for both of them. But like New Orleans finally had somebody, to kind of rally behind. And for years, I think they had their lunch money taken, and they finally had somebody else.
So tell me, you're from Louisville, right?
Yeah, L's up.
Don't know what that means.
You will.
But you're in a position to see, pre-Katrina, post-Katrina, and be inside the heads of three of the most amazing leaders of our city's history. How's that? Are you a
pretty big statement? City's history.
help me of those three? Collectively together,
Well, I
Yeah.
mean, think about it, Tim.
Yeah.
We don't have a lot of great leaders here. I would say historically, I mean, our governmental leaders. I mean, I think.
Huey Long.
Yeah, I mean,
So who else would
we
be
had a
who would
lot
be
of.
in that three? Who else would be in that?
Mary Matlin said something once during the Super Bowl. She said most of America thinks New Orleans, New Orleans, half of New Orleans is either under indictment or underwater or something.
Right.
That was our line. Like everybody's either we're underwater or under indictment. So I think our government has had such a sordid history. It's hard to look to there, and our business hasn't been that great. I just feel like we haven't had a lot of great leadership here. And so when we find a great leader, like when Nick Saban came to LSU,
Yeah.
Sean Payton, I think sometimes our sports takes that torch. And I think Sean Payton came at the right time along with Drew Brees when we needed, like, again, don't play the victim card. Yeah, this was obviously a terrible catastrophe, but he didn't use that as an excuse. And we saw them immediately win. I think that was critical too, that they won right away because it validated what they were doing on the airline drive, and they needed that. I think they'd been gone 8 and 9 that year, it wouldn't have been the same.
Mm-hmm.
But they bolted out of the gate. They'll tell you, I mean, they won their first 2 games. They really weren't very good. And then they played the dome game here against the Falcons and won that game. And all of a sudden they're 3-0. And the whole, you know how this city is. I mean, I use that line all the time. It's either a crisis or a carnival. I mean, it was a carnival, man.
Oh my God.
Every weekend. I mean, everybody's just
We actually believe we could do it.
right.
We believe we could win.
And there was nothing else really going in our favor back then. I mean, we were struggling. I mean, a lot of people thought the Saints weren't even going to come back. So for them to come back and then be really good, and you have this incredible quarterback. We never had a great quarterback, and he was the perfect guy. And he was like senatorial. He knew how to say all the right things. It was the perfect storm. And I think
Shoulder not really working.
right.
Yeah.
He didn't use an excuse. And Drew was he was the perfect leader at the time too. I mean, I've never been around a guy like, if you're around Drew Brees, like he wants to succeed in everything he does. And I know that sounds cliche, but like what I mean by that is like if I would sit down to interview him for the book, like he knew what I was trying to accomplish. He's like, okay, Jeff's writing a book, so I'm going to deliver to Jeff during these 45 minutes the best answers he's ever gotten. Like that's how he's wired. Like I'm going to be the best interview subject he's ever had. And he would. I'm like, holy shit, that was like unbelievable stuff. Like you walk away, just everything he did was like that. And I think it was a miracle that we got it. Again, we go back to fate and karma, but like the only reason we got Sean Payton is because Green Bay went to Mike McCarthy. The only reason we got Drew Brees was because Nick Saban and the Dolphins doctors red flagged his shoulder.
Yeah.
So it was kind of just a miracle we got both those guys. Neither one of them, we weren't the first choice for either one of them. Miami and Green Bay were where they wanted to go, and they ended up here.
So this book is coming out when?
April 30th, next week.
Next week. If I'm got an early copy of the book, what chapter do you hope everyone reads? Gotta read. What's the one chapter that's a gotta? What's the one that?
One, you're limiting me to one.
Oh, we have top one. I mean, what do you hope ever? What's the one thing what's your favorite story in here? Your favorite?
Well, I've told a few of them. Like I think the love story between Steve and Michelle is special. Where they meet, I mean, they meet at the Jazz Fest Triathlon, and I mean, it's such a romantic love affair. And I think Knopf, our publisher, recognized right away this is more than just a Steve Gleason story. Michelle is very much.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it really could be the story, both their stories, because I mean, she's amazing. And neither one of them likes to act like they're a hero. They hate that term. We're not a saint. I remember Michelle getting mad at me using that word once in the column. They're like, we're just people trying to freaking figure this thing out. So if you read the book, I'm telling you, they put everything in there. When I mean everything, I mean like the last time they had sex, it's in there. And it's heartbreaking. There's affairs in that. I mean, she's willing to put herself out there, knowing that that's not going to look good for her. But she said, this is what this disease is. It's a motherfucker. It's her word. And they want it to be unvarnished, raw look at what they've gone through. And what's amazing about it is they got through it. They got through the dark tunnel and got to the other side. That's what I hope people take away is like it's a perspective. Thomas Morstead said, Steve Gleason's a daily dose of perspective. And yet this guy, not only does he get through it, but he gets through it with this like shining light of like gratitude and love. It's just amazing. And Michelle too. I mean, Michelle was basically a single mom with, caring for a husband who, when she married him, was a Greek god. If you look at those photos, you've seen how jacked he was. Who was a protector of hers, and then he became basically like a child that she had to take care of. I mean, she's so strong. So both of them are incredible. And I mean, and the fact that they were courageous enough to put all that in there and not make it a Disney movie is why I think it's so powerful.
I'm gonna end it with you guys, if you have any questions of one of the pieces that Steve did with the AI was, and I make sure I get the quote right, that for a tree to reach heaven, its roots gotta go to hell. How do you interpret that? What's he saying?
He's if you notice, there's oak leaves on the cover. That's a running theme throughout the book. Is he finds sacred places in life. He thinks those are important. So right now it's oak trees out back of his house. It's where he meditates. It's where he kind of communes with nature. He used to surf or fish or hike in nature. He finds that's where God is, whatever God is. And he goes into great detail of like he's not quite sure what it is, but like he knows there's something there. And so the oak tree became his sacred place here. Matter of fact, this is pretty, I think, poignant story. So for the 5-year anniversary is wood, right? You have an anniversary, paper, gold, whatever. The 5-year anniversary is wood. And instead of like, he said, instead of giving like Michelle like a serving tray, like a wood serving tray, he gave her an oak tree, a live oak tree, and they planted it in their front yard. And he said it was like a symbol of their love, that you watch it grow. And so that became like part of this story, watching them grow. And he said, I realized later on, and for a long time, it actually wasn't growing at all. Like he said, there was no new growth, there's no sprouts. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, like a year later, all of a sudden it started sprouting. And that's kind of like when they kind of started getting back together and things started going, it's crazy. And so for him, I think the oak tree, I mean, he has a running document right now. And we have a GQ story coming out about the book where my colleague, Brett Martin, who's a fabulous writer, lives here in town, spent some time with him, and he got into this with him, like his mortality. Steve's not afraid to talk about death at all. As a matter of fact, he kind of likes talking about it, he embraces it. It's awkward for us, but again, that's just the next adventure for Steve. He calls it the ultimate adventure, death, again, how he's wired. So he's got a whole document called the Impermanence Project that's basically his blueprint for how he wants to die and what he wants done. And one of the things he's looked into is, not surprising, is he's found a company that will basically make his remains compost, and then he wants to be buried under an oak tree and fuel an oak tree and the cycle of life. And, that's just how he's going to go out. And he's already thought about it, and he's willing to talk about it. And Michelle's like, I'm not going to be under that oak tree. I'm sorry, you could do that. That's how they're wired. But, for him, nature is the symbol of whatever's the higher power. And the oak tree is certainly, and we tried it. We had this amazing photo. And I'm not sure, one of his good friends is, and I'm not sure, is it Frank Rell or Frank
Rally.
Relly?
Yeah. Okay.
Frank Relli is one of his good friends, and we got this incredible photo that Frank took that we thought should have been the cover of the book. It was a photo of Steve under the oak tree meditating at night with that incredible,
Mm.
backlights.
Lit, yeah.
Holy shit! It's like unbelievable photo. Steve's got it now in his bedroom wall, and it might end up being the cover of the paperback because they like to do a totally different cover. But that photo to me is, perfectly captures Steve. He's out there by himself, meditating under the tree, thinking about light with this incredible lighting, and they thought it didn't work for this cover right here. I think they were wrong, but Knopf's very literary and very, they didn't want it to be too arty. So,
Sounds like an AI project. No.
yeah, and I don't know if I answered your question about the.
It's only about that going to hell. You're going to hell, and
Yeah, I mean, he thinks about that a lot, like heaven and hell. Like I told you, he's a deep thinker. I mean, the last 2, 3 chapters of the book took us way too long to write because he was so into like trying to, tell this life story. I think he put so much pressure on himself to what has he learned on this journey. We wanted him to kind of summarize it. And I think he was getting so deep because he's so well read and he was quoting all these mentors of his that he reads or he listens to on these audiobooks. And we were like, Steve, people are buying the book for what you think, not what you've learned. I mean, some of that's in there, but people really want to hear you, not the book you read. Like that could be in a publicity story about the book, but we need to know what you think. No one else has been in your shoes on this journey you're on. As much as you admire these 20th century, 21st century thinkers, no one has been on your journey. So let's get your life lessons instead. So we went through a little bit of a struggle getting it. He got to that finally. He didn't like to, draw too much attention to himself.
well, I'm gonna take a pause here and thank you for taking your time to get his story out, and also, I guess this book will allow people to see what he really thinks.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I think it's an easy read too. I mean, Steve's an incredible writer, and
He wrote this.
we both wrote it.
Yeah.
I mean, we all wrote it. Michelle wrote a lot of it. Late nights, we shared it. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there were days I thought we were all going to kill each other. I mean, it's what happens during a book project. But like, Michelle is a tremendous writer, and like I said, we had this treasure trove of documents. They had journals, everything they did. I mean, who does that? Like they wrote journal after journal, and so I had this unbelievable amount of content. And it's the same thing if you saw the documentary that they struggled with, like I was kidding you earlier, but there's so much there. It's almost like too much. There's so much good content. You had to decide what would fit in the book and what didn't. And I know that was part of the problem with the documentary they did, is they had too much, too much figured out what's good and what isn't, and what's the thread here? What's the narrative arc? There's so much with Steve. It's actually hard to keep it on.
It feels like it's not over. The arc's not over.
No, it's definitely not over. No, this guy, I'm telling you, man, he's gonna be 5 minutes not taking a breath. I told him he's like one of these like sea iguanas that dives down, gets the moss on the bottom of the ocean. What are you doing?
I'm not gonna breathe today.
Yeah, I'm just not gonna breathe. Like he's gonna be like one of those guys, deep sea divers. No, I mean he's amazing. And so look, I tried to do a book with him 10 years ago, and I'm so glad we couldn't sell it in New York. We tried to sell it in New York. Same thing. Yeah, I mean, like people in New York are like, who's this guy? He might be known in New Orleans, but he didn't resonate nationally. But it was the best thing that ever happened because he's had so much more to the journey. He's got so much more perspective on life and what is important. He didn't have back then. He was still in the middle of where he was going. He was going to these. He tells the story about going to. Again, this shows you how he's wired. He went to like lack of a better term, like a witch doctor. Like out in California, was out in this yurt. Doing like they were like doing all these like crazy chants and stuff. Thought that was going to heal him from ALS. But he's like, I'm not closing the door on
Try everything.
I guess when you get a terminal diagnosis, I mean, who's to say He goes, you just
You got to remove the rope and go on the other side, right?
yeah, you got to push the envelope. But he said he realized it was not the answer when he goes, we're out there 3 days in this yurt, chanting, smoking all this crazy stuff. And then he goes, we came back, and the night before I'm getting my plane at LAX, I'm in his suburban house in LA, and he brings me like a TV dinner. It's like meatloaf or something, and he's watching like sitcoms. It's like, maybe this guy's gonna heal my ALS. Maybe it's a little bit of a scam. But he tried it.
Well, feels like we're about to, with what you're doing, and I know hopefully with what he's doing with other things, the world's about to hear the story. So this is going to be an exciting journey. Jeff, give me a little round of applause for Jeff. Thank you.
Thank you all.